What is the Space Force for? Hey, I am Chuck the Bureaucrat, and a little while ago I posted a video talking about the new Space Force Class A uniforms. They have opted for a distinctive uniform that almost unavoidably looks like something out of a sci-fi movie. And I was making the simple point that the real test of that uniform isn't whether or not the Guardians like it, or Congress tolerates it, or YouTubers think much of it. The test is whether or not that uniform communicates the right message to the next of kin of a Guardian who has been killed in the line of duty. But a lot of you, and I mean a lot, started peppering me with all sorts of questions. What's the Space Force for? Is it just a boondoggle? Is it a scam to boost the defense budget? Well, first of all, what is the Space Force? The Space Force was created in the National Defense Authorization Act of fiscal year 2020 by redesignating the Air Force's Space Command as the U.S. Space Force. While the Space Force is a separate and distinct armed service, it's organized underneath the Air Force in a way that's very similar to how the Marine Corps is organized underneath the Navy. The real point here is that the civilian political appointees who oversee the Space Force are the same ones who oversee the Air Force. Broadly speaking, what is the Space Force's mission? Well, in early September of this year, the Space Force announced a new mission statement. That is, to secure our nation's interest in, from, and to space. The funny thing about this mission statement is that the Chief of Space Operations said, "We did not hire a corporate marketing team to develop a catchphrase, nor did generals sit around a table in the Pentagon debating what the statement should be. Our mission statement was sourced from a Guardian-driven process." The Space Force solicited responses from units and individuals, and they got back about 135. Then in July, they went through 8 focus groups to shape that mission statement. But don't worry, it's not like the Space Force was actually crowdsourcing its mission statement. Their new mission statement is almost verbatim what Congress directed them to do when they created the Space Force. That is, it shall be the duty of the Space Force to protect the interests of the U.S. in space, deter aggression in, from, and to space, and conduct space operations. I mean, it's always a good idea to base your mission statement on what higher headquarters directed you to do. Okay, so is that new mission statement just a smokescreen for higher spending? Not really. I mean, if the Department of Defense wants to pump more taxpayer dollars into the defense industrial base, they don't need a new organization to do it. In fiscal year 24, the Department of Defense requested $170 billion to procure new hardware, and that was up from $164 the previous year. The Space Force only got $4.7 billion of that total, something like 3%. And most of the growth in procurement came from Air Force missile procurement and some Navy stuff. So what is really happening? Well, I don't have any hard evidence, but I think that the Space Force is addressing a legitimate organizational challenge that's being dealt with by the Department of Defense. One of those problems that has cultural elements as well as command issues. Based on the career fields that are listed on the Space Force recruiting website, it appears that in, from, and to space part of the mission relies heavily on intelligence analysts, cyber techs, and some software development. You see, to a certain extent, the Space Force offers the Department of Defense the opportunity to consolidate those functions under a single organization. But do you notice something about those career fields? They're primarily sitting behind a desk, staring at computer kind of jobs. And it shouldn't come as any particular surprise that back in May of 2023, the Space Force put a pause on giving Guardians a physical fitness test. They are conducting a 2-year pilot to see if they can maintain Guardian physical fitness simply by tracking heart rates. There is one of the uses that I think the Space Force is going to provide to the Department of Defense. If you've watched the Army's botched rollout of their Army Combat Fitness Test, you know that one of the issues that they've wrestled with is whether or not to have different physical fitness standards for different career fields. Does a software developer really need to be as physically fit as an artilleryman? Well, by consolidating all those computer jockeys under a single service with its own set of standards, that issue just goes away. Plus, do you notice something else about these career fields? They are not exactly the kinds of jobs that close with and destroy the enemy in the unrelenting crucible of ground combat. They don't even really need to deploy outside of CONUS. And that, I think, is going to become one of the most attractive features of the Space Force. If you've tolerated my videos for long, you know that I believe that over a long enough time horizon, the U.S. military is going to have to resort to a draft whether they like it or not. And there's this little phenomenon that happens when you're operating under a draft. Politicians and powerful people, they want their children to serve, but certainly not in a way that they might get killed. So often, there's some sort of military organization that doesn't deploy that serves this role for these powerful people. During the Vietnam War, that was the National Guard. You might remember the whole hullabaloo about George Bush's Air National Guard service in 1968 to 1974. Well, today's National Guard, it gets plenty of deployments, and the soldiers who serve as part of the National Guard have seen lots of combat. So what's a congressman to do? Well, luckily, the next time the balloon goes up, the Space Force is going to be there for his son. In the meantime, it'll be interesting to see what the effect of different physical fitness standards and deployments has on the recruiting for the Space Force, and whether or not it has long-term effects on the other services. And now, that is enough water cooler gossip for today. It is time for you to get better at your job. During the development of this video, I used a technique that I call the old J-book technique. And that's a method for digging into publicly available defense budget information. That technique and the resources that it accesses can get you immensely useful information. So if you're interested in that, watch this video.